The darkness of space stretched endlessly around the massive Zephyrian defense station. Commander Vexstar moved through the control room on his 4 powerful legs, his crystalline skin reflecting the soft blue light from the monitoring screens. He had been stationed here for 12 years, watching over the outer rim of the mighty Zephyrian Empire. This was Kepler 442b, a mining world rich in rare metals that powered the Empire's vast fleet of warships. The defense station was enormous, larger than most cities back on the home world. It bristled with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Plasma cannons lined every surface, their barrels gleaming with deadly energy. Energy shields surrounded the station like invisible walls that nothing could break through. Gravitational disruptors waited silently, ready to tear apart any enemy ship at the molecular level. The Empire had built this fortress over 3 centuries, and it had never failed to protect their territory. Vexstar checked the daily reports from his officers. Mining operations were running smoothly below on the planet's surface. The transport. Ships would arrive next week to carry the precious metals back to the capital worlds. Everything was peaceful, just as it had been for decades. The Empire's enemies had learned long ago not to challenge their superior technology that far across the galaxy. Captain Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of the human warship UHS Defiance. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and steady green, eyes that missed nothing. The ship around her was sleek and powerful, but much smaller than the massive vessels favored by other species. Humans had learned to build ships that were fast and clever rather than big and slow. The Defiance had been traveling through empty space for 3 months, searching for the Empire's secret supply routes. Earth's intelligence services had discovered that the Zephyrians were planning to expand their territory again. They had already enslaved 17 different species, forcing them to work in mines and factories across hundreds of worlds. Humanity would not let them add Earth to that list. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat at the tactical station, his fingers dancing across the control panels. He was young for his rank, only 26 years old, but he had already proven himself in several dangerous missions. His job was to find weaknesses in enemy defenses and exploit them with surgical precision. Jake had been studying Zephyrian military tactics for years, and he believed he had found patterns in how they fought. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez worked deep in the ship's engine room, surrounded by the gentle hum of advanced machinery. She was one of the best engineers in the human fleet, and she had personally designed many of the Defiance's unique systems. The ship's fusion antimatter hybrid engines were her masterpiece, capable of speeds that defied traditional physics. But even more important were the emotional resonance amplifiers hidden throughout the ship. These amplifiers were humanity's secret weapon. While other species relied purely on computer calculations and rigid protocols, humans fought with intuition and creativity. The amplifiers enhanced these natural abilities, allowing the crew to process information faster and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between victory and death. The crew of 847 humans had trained together for 2 years. They came from every continent on Earth, bringing different cultures and perspectives that made them stronger as a team. Some had been soldiers, others were scientists or engineers. All of them shared one thing in common. They believed that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the odds. Captain Martinez walked to the main viewing screen, where stars glittered like diamonds against the black of space. Somewhere out there was the Empire's defense station, guarding their supply lines with weapons that could level mountains. Intelligence reports suggested it was the most heavily fortified position in this sector of the galaxy. But Martinez had faith in her crew and their revolutionary technology. Back on the defense station, sensor operator Thylon noticed something strange on his instruments. There was a faint reading at the edge of their detection range, something that appeared and disappeared like a ghost. He adjusted the controls, trying to get a clearer picture, but the signal kept shifting. It was unlike anything in their databases. Thylon reported the anomaly to Commander Vextar, who immediately ordered a full sensor sweep of the area. The station's powerful scanners reached out across millions of kilometers, searching for any sign of an intruder. The readings were confusing and contradictory. Whatever was out there seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, flickering between dimensions like a bad transmission signal. Vextar felt a chill run through his crystalline body. In all his years of service, he had never seen anything like this. The Empire's sensors were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of detecting a single ship from 3 star systems away. But this unknown contact was somehow evading their technology, appearing to phase in and out of reality itself. On the Defiance, Dr. Patricia Walsh monitored the ship's stealth systems from her position at the science station. She was a xenobiologist by training, but her studies of alien psychology had proven invaluable in developing new military technologies. The phase shift drive that kept them hidden was based on her research into how different species perceived reality. Navigator Sam Chun plotted their final approach to the target. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke during missions, but his calculations were always perfect. The route he had chosen would bring them out of phase shift directly in front of the defense station, giving them maximum tactical advantage for the opening moments of combat. Weapons Officer Alex Turner checked and rechecked their quantum tunneling torpedoes. These weapons were completely theoretical until 6 months ago, when human scientists had finally solved the mathematics needed to make them work. Unlike conventional missiles, quantum torpedoes could pass through enemy shields as if they didn't exist, striking targets with devastating precision. The Defiance continued its silent approach through folded space, invisible to the Empire's sensors, but moving steadily toward its destination. Captain Martinez knew that once they dropped out of phase shift, there would be no turning back. They would be committed to a battle against odds that no sane military commander would accept. But humans had never been accused of being entirely sane. They were the species that had climbed down from trees to hunt animals 10 times their size. They were the ones who had built ships to cross oceans before they understood what lay on the other side. They had reached for the stars while still fighting wars with sticks and stones. Impossible challenges didn't stop humans. They inspired them to find new ways to win. The space around the Zephyrian defense station suddenly twisted and warped like water disturbed by a stone. Reality itself seemed to bend and crack before snapping back into place with a flash of brilliant white light. Where empty space had existed moments before, the human warship UHS Defiance now floated in perfect silence. Commander Vextar stared at his main viewing screen in complete shock. The alien vessel was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, covered in strange markings that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The ship was much smaller than Zephyrian warships, but something about its design made his crystalline skin crawl with unease. "Battle stations," Vextar commanded, his voice echoing through the massive defense station. Warning lights flashed red as thousands of crew members rushed to their positions. The station's mighty weapons systems came online with a deep humming, sound that vibrated through the metal floors. Energy shields blazed to life around the fortress, creating a barrier that had never been broken by any enemy in 300 years. Captain Martinez stood calmly on the bridge of the Defiance as alien weapons locked onto her ship. She could see the defense station through the main viewer, a massive construct bristling with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But she felt no fear, only the steady determination that had carried humanity from their home planet to the stars. "Open a communication channel," Martinez ordered. Communications Officer Kelly Brooks worked quickly at her station, sending out standard diplomatic protocols in 17 different languages. The message was simple and direct. humanity wished to establish peaceful contact with the Zephyrian Empire. The response came not in words, but in violence. Dozens of plasma cannons erupted from the defense station, sending streams of superheated energy racing toward the human ship. The bolts were bright enough to blind unprotected eyes and carried enough power to vaporize a city block. Lieutenant Jake Morrison watched the incoming fire on his tactical display and smiled grimly. "Shields are adapting," he reported to Captain Martinez. The plasma bolts struck the Defiance's defensive barriers and simply vanished, absorbed by technology that learned and evolved with each attack. Commander Vextar could not believe what his sensors were telling him. The alien ship had taken direct hits from their most powerful weapons and showed no damage at all. Worse, their energy readings suggested the enemy shields were actually growing stronger with each shot. "Increase power to maximum," Vextar ordered. "Deploy gravitational disruptors." These weapons were the pride of Zephyrian military science, designed to tear apart the molecular bonds that held matter together. No known substance could withstand their crushing force. The gravitational disruptors fired with a sound like thunder, sending invisible waves of distorted spacetime toward the human vessel. The weapons should have reduced the Defiance to its component atoms, scattering them across light years of empty space. Instead, the human ship simply shrugged off the attack, as if it were a gentle breeze. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez monitored the situation from the engine room, watching as her adaptive shielding systems analyzed and countered each new weapon type. The emotional resonance amplifiers throughout the ship hummed softly, enhancing the crew's natural ability to think quickly under pressure. "Their weapons are impressive, but predictable," Rodriguez reported to the bridge. "The shields are learning their patterns. We should be immune to further attacks within 60 seconds. Captain Martinez nodded and turned to her weapons officer. "Alex, show them what human engineering can accomplish." Alex Turner's fingers moved across his control panel with deadly precision. The Defiance's quantum tunneling torpedoes launched from hidden ports along the ship's hull. These weapons existed in a state of quantum superposition, neither fully real nor completely imaginary, until they reached their target. Commander Vextar watched in horror as the human missiles approached his station's shields and simply passed through them without slowing down. The torpedoes phased through the energy barriers as if they were made of empty air, striking the station's armored hull with devastating effect. Explosions rippled across the defense station as critical systems overloaded and failed. The quantum torpedoes had been precisely targeted, hitting power relays and command centers with surgical accuracy. In seconds, the mighty fortress had been reduced to a crippled wreck, its weapons offline and its shields flickering weakly. Dr. Patricia Walsh monitored the battle from her science station, analyzing Zephyrian communication patterns and tactical responses. Her studies had revealed that the Empire's military operated on rigid protocols that left little room for improvisation. They were excellent at following established procedures, but struggled when faced with completely new situations. "Their command structure is collapsing," Walsh reported. "They're trying to implement standard damage control procedures, but they don't have protocols for weapons that ignore their defenses." The human crew worked together with fluid efficiency, each person anticipating the needs of their teammates. Navigator San Chun adjusted their position to maximize firing angles, while Jake Morrison coordinated their attacks. The emotional amplifiers allowed them to function as a single organism, their individual skills combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. Commander Vextar stumbled through his damaged control room, trying to understand how his impregnable fortress had been defeated so easily. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls as smoke filled the air. His officers stared at their instruments in confusion, unable to comprehend weapons that operated outside known physics. "Send a distress signal," Vextar commanded. "Tell the High Command that we have encountered a new species with technology beyond our understanding." Warn them that our defenses are useless against these creatures." The communication officer's hands shook as he transmitted the desperate message. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy through technological superiority for millennia. They had crushed every enemy with weapons that seemed like magic to primitive species. But now they faced opponents who possessed something even more dangerous than advanced technology, minds that thrived on impossible challenges. Captain Martinez watched the crippled defense station drift helplessly in space. She felt no satisfaction in the victory, only sadness that diplomacy had failed. Humanity had hoped to find friends among the stars, but instead they had discovered an empire built on oppression and fear. "Scan for survivors," Martinez ordered. "Prepare medical teams for rescue operations." Even in war, humans held on to their compassion. It was perhaps their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness, depending on who they faced. The battle was over in minutes, but its consequences would reshape the galaxy forever. The emergency signal from the defense station reached the Zephyrian capital world, just as High Admiral Kethmer was reviewing fleet deployments in his private chamber. The crystalline walls of his office reflected his four-armed silhouette as he read the impossible report for the third time. A single unknown vessel had destroyed the Outer Rim's most powerful fortress in minutes, using weapons that ignored every known defense. Kethmer crushed the datapad in his lower hands, while his upper arms gestured angrily at the holographic displays around him. He had built his career on the Empire's technological superiority over lesser species. The idea that some primitive aliens could develop weapons beyond Zephyrian understanding was not just impossible, it was insulting. "Summon Admiral Zareth," Kethmer commanded his aide. "Tell him to prepare the Third Battle Fleet for immediate deployment." The Third Fleet was the Empire's hammer. 50 warships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets in half. If these mysterious aliens wanted war, they would face the full might of Zephyrian military power. Admiral Zareth received the orders while inspecting his flagship, the mighty dreadnought Eternal Dominion. He was a veteran of countless campaigns, having personally overseen the conquest of 17 different species. His tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency had made him a legend throughout the Empire. No enemy had ever escaped his wrath once he set his mind to their destruction. The Admiral's scarred face twisted into a grin as he read about the aliens' attack on the defense station. These creatures had made a fatal mistake by revealing themselves too early. They might have superior weapons, but they were still just one ship against an entire fleet. Numbers and experience would triumph over fancy technology, just as they always had. Far away in the depths of space, Captain Martinez gathered her senior officers in the Defiance's main briefing room. The walls displayed tactical information about the destroyed defense station and projections of Zephyrian fleet movements. Intelligence Officer Ryan Cooper had been working around the clock to decode enemy communications, and his findings painted a grim picture. "They're mobilizing everything in this sector," Cooper reported, his voice tired but steady. 3 dreadnoughts, 20 heavy cruisers, and 30 escort vessels. The force they're sending could sterilize our entire home system without breaking a sweat. Dr. Patricia Walsh studied the psychological profiles she had compiled from interrogating captured Zephyrian personnel. The Empire's rigid military hierarchy created predictable patterns of behavior that humans could potentially exploit. But exploiting weaknesses required surviving long enough to use them, and the approaching fleet represented overwhelming firepower. "We have 2 options," Captain Martinez said quietly. "We can retreat to Earth and report what we've learned, or we can stay and try to gather more intelligence about their capabilities." She looked around the table at her officers, seeing the determination in their eyes. These were people who had volunteered for a suicide mission, knowing they might never see home again. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez spoke first. The phase shift drive needs 6 hours to recharge for a long-distance jump. If we're going to run, we need to decide now. Her hands moved restlessly as she calculated power requirements and engine specifications. The Defiance was fast, but the approaching fleet would spread out to cover all possible escape routes. Lieutenant Jake Morrison pulled up holographic displays showing Zephyrian battle formations. They fight like they think, in rigid patterns, with predetermined responses to specific threats. If we can force them into situations they haven't trained for, we might have a chance. His young face was serious as he traced potential attack vectors through the enemy fleet. Navigator Sam Chun quietly studied stellar charts, identifying asteroid fields and debris zones that could provide cover during a running battle. His calm demeanor never changed, but his eyes burned with the same fierce determination that drove all of humanity's explorers. They had not come this far just to turn back when things became difficult. Weapons Officer Alex Turner checked their remaining ammunition supplies. The quantum torpedoes were incredibly effective, but limited in number. They had enough for perhaps one major engagement before being forced to rely on conventional weapons that might not penetrate Zephyrian armor. Communications. Officer Kelly Brooks monitored enemy transmissions, listening to the growing excitement in Zephyrian communications as their fleet prepared for battle. The aliens were confident, perhaps overconfident, in their ability to crush a single human vessel. That arrogance might provide opportunities for creative tactics. Dr. Walsh presented her analysis of Zephyrian command structure and decision-making processes. They've never faced an enemy that adapts during combat, she explained. Their entire military doctrine assumes that superior technology equals automatic victory. When that assumption fails, their rigid thinking becomes a liability. The debate continued for an hour as the officers weighed their options. Retreat meant safety, but also abandoning their mission to gather intelligence about Empire capabilities. Staying meant almost certain death, but also the chance to learn valuable information that could help Earth prepare for the coming war. Captain Martinez listened to each perspective before making her decision. We stay, she announced. Not because we think we can win, but because Earth needs to know what we're really up against. If this fleet has weaknesses, we need to find them. The crew received the news with grim acceptance. They had known from the beginning that this might be a one-way mission. Humanity's survival might depend on the intelligence they could gather about Zephyrian military capabilities, even if it cost them their lives. Across the galaxy, Admiral Zareth stood on the bridge of his flagship as the Third Battle Fleet prepared to depart. His officers moved with efficient precision, checking weapon systems and shield generators. The fleet's firepower was enough to reduce continents to ash, and every crew member was a veteran of multiple campaigns. Set course for the target system, Zareth commanded. Maximum acceleration. These aliens destroyed one of our installations, and they will pay for that insult with their lives. The dreadnought's massive engines roared to life, pushing the enormous vessel toward its destination. The hunt was beginning, and both sides believed they understood what they were facing. Only time would reveal which species had made the more dangerous miscalculation about their enemy's true capabilities and determination. The Zephyrian Third Battle Fleet dropped out of hyperspace like avenging gods, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. Admiral Zareth stood proudly on the bridge of his flagship as 50 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation. Around him, the 3 dreadnoughts alone carried enough firepower to glass entire worlds, while the heavy cruisers and escort vessels formed an impenetrable wall of death. Captain Martinez watched the enemy fleet appear on her tactical display and felt her heart skip a beat. The Defiance was dwarfed by even the smallest Zephyrian escort ship, and the dreadnoughts looked like floating cities bristling with weapons. Any sane commander would surrender immediately rather than face such overwhelming odds. But humans had never been particularly sane when it came to impossible challenges. "All hands, this is the captain," Martinez announced over the ship's communication system. "We are about to implement Protocol Chaos. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust each other. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of." Protocol Chaos was a uniquely human battle doctrine that abandoned all conventional military wisdom. Instead of predictable formations and standard tactics, it relied on creativity, improvisation, and the willingness to attempt maneuvers that no rational enemy would expect. It was madness disguised as strategy, and it had never failed when properly executed. Admiral Zareth opened a communication channel to the tiny human vessel. "Alien ship, you have violated Empire territory and destroyed our property. Surrender immediately or be annihilated." His voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Captain." Martinez responded with actions rather than words. The Defiance suddenly vanished from normal space as its phase shift drive engaged, leaving the Zephyrian sensors tracking empty vacuum. For a moment, the entire enemy fleet searched frantically for their target. Lieutenant Jake Morrison coordinated the attack from his tactical station as the Defiance reappeared directly beneath the flagship's belly. Quantum torpedoes streaked upward into the dreadnought's unarmored underhull, causing massive explosions that rippled along the enormous vessel's length. Before the Zephyrians could react, the human ship had vanished again. Admiral Zareth roared orders to his fleet as damage reports flooded in from the Eternal Dominion. How could one small ship appear and disappear at will? His officers scrambled to adjust their sensors and weapon systems, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of conventional warfare. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez pushed the Defiance's hybrid engines beyond all safety limits, giving the ship acceleration and maneuverability that defied physics. The emotional resonance amplifiers throughout the vessel hummed with increasing intensity, allowing the crew to function as a single coordinated organism. Each person anticipated the needs of their teammates without conscious thought. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse as the human ship danced between the massive Zephyrian vessels. The Defiance would appear for seconds at a time, just long enough to deliver devastating attacks on critical system junctions, then vanish before return fire could find its target. Each quantum torpedo was precisely aimed to cause maximum disruption with minimum ammunition. Weapons. Officer Alex Turner had studied the enemy ship designs for months, identifying weak points and critical vulnerabilities. The Zephyrians built their vessels like fortresses, with heavy armor and massive weapons, but they sacrificed speed and agility for raw power. Their ships were designed to engage enemies in traditional standoff battles, not to chase phantoms that struck from impossible angles. Navigator Sam Chun plotted course corrections with split-second timing, using asteroid fields and debris from previous battles to mask their approach vectors. His calculations had to be perfect because even a small error would bring them within range of weapons that could vaporize the Defiance in milliseconds. The Zephyrian fleet tried to surround the human ship, spreading out in a complex formation designed to eliminate all possible escape routes. But the phase shift drive allowed the Defiance to ignore conventional three-dimensional tactics, appearing above and below the enemy formation in ways that their tactical computers couldn't predict or counter. Communications. Officer Kelly Brooks worked frantically at her station, attempting something that had never been tried in combat before. Using the ship's advanced AI systems, she began penetrating the Zephyrian command network through their own communication channels. The Empire's rigid protocols made their systems predictable, and predictable systems could be hacked. Dr. Patricia Walsh monitored the psychological impact of the battle on both crews. The Zephyrians were becoming increasingly frustrated and desperate as their overwhelming advantages proved useless against human unpredictability. Their rigid training had not prepared them for enemies who thrived on chaos and impossible situations. Intelligence Officer Ryan Cooper analyzed enemy movement patterns, feeding tactical data to Jake Morrison's targeting systems. Each Zephyrian response became more predictable as their commanders fell back on standard procedures that had worked against conventional enemies. But humans were anything but conventional. The tide of battle began to turn as Brooks succeeded in her hacking attempt. False orders suddenly flooded the Zephyrian command network, causing parts of their fleet to fire on each other in confusion. The Empire's hierarchical structure, designed to ensure absolute obedience, became their weakness as ships followed corrupted commands without question. Admiral Zareth watched in horror as his perfectly coordinated fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships collided with each other as contradictory orders sent them on intersecting courses. Weapons fire intended for the human vessel struck friendly targets instead. The discipline that had made the Zephyrian military invincible was being turned against them by creatures who understood the power of organized confusion. The Defiance continued its relentless assault, striking at damaged vessels and finishing off crippled ships with surgical precision. Each attack was perfectly timed and flawlessly executed, taking advantage of momentary gaps in the enemy formation. The human crew worked with inhuman efficiency, their enhanced abilities allowing them to process information and react faster than any computer got as Zephyrian ships began exploding around him. Admiral Zareth finally understood the true horror of facing humanity in battle. These aliens didn't just fight to win. They excelled at violence with a creativity and determination that transformed warfare into art. When cornered, they became more dangerous rather than less, finding strength in desperation. It is logical. Mind couldn't comprehend. The once mighty Third Battle Fleet was rapidly becoming a debris field. The space around the mining world of Kepler 442b was now a graveyard of twisted metal and burning debris. Where the mighty Third Battle Fleet had once proudly displayed the Empire's power, only scattered wreckage remained. 47 Zephyrian warships floated dead in the darkness, their hulls cracked open like broken eggs. The three massive dreadnoughts that had inspired fear across the galaxy were now nothing more than expanding clouds of superheated gas. Admiral Zareth sat alone on the emergency bridge of his crippled flagship, watching his life's work burn around him. Half of his crew was dead, the other half desperately fighting fires and trying to keep life support systems online. The Eternal Dominion, once the pride of the Empire's fleet, now drifted helplessly with its engines destroyed and weapons offline. With shaking hands, Zareth activated the emergency communication system. His message would take hours to reach the capital world, but High Admiral Kethmer needed to know the truth about humanity before it was too late. The transmission began with standard military protocols, but quickly descended into something approaching panic. High Command, this is Admiral Zareth with an emergency report, he began, his voice cracking with exhaustion and disbelief. The Third Battle Fleet has been destroyed by a single enemy vessel. I repeat, 50 ships have been eliminated by one alien warship. Their technology renders our defenses meaningless, but worse than that, their minds work in ways we cannot predict or counter. The surviving Zephyrian vessels limped away from the battlefield, their crews traumatized by the impossible defeat they had witnessed. These were veterans who had conquered star systems and enslaved entire species, but they had never faced an enemy that turned warfare itself into a weapon of mass destruction. Captain Martinez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, surveying the aftermath of their victory through the main viewing screen. The ship's hull was scarred by enemy fire, and they had lost 37 crew members during the battle. Each death weighed heavily on her conscience, but she knew their sacrifice had served a greater purpose. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez worked frantically to repair damaged systems throughout the ship. The phase shift drive had been pushed far beyond safe limits during the battle, and several of the emotional resonance amplifiers had burned out from overuse. But the core systems remained intact, and the Defiance was still capable of making the journey home to Earth. Dr. Patricia Walsh analyzed the vast amounts of data they had gathered during the engagement. The captured Zephyrian communication logs revealed the locations of dozens of slave worlds where conquered species toiled under Empire rule. More importantly, they showed that the Zephyrians had grown complacent after centuries of easy victories. Their military doctrine had not evolved because they had never needed it to. Intelligence Officer Ryan Cooper decoded emergency transmissions from the fleeing enemy ships, learning valuable information about Empire fleet dispositions and defensive strategies. The Zephyrians were already recalling ships from border sectors to protect their core worlds, creating opportunities for liberation movements among their enslaved populations. Lieutenant Jake Morrison compiled tactical assessments of Zephyrian weaknesses for transmission to Earth's military command. The Empire's reliance on rigid protocols and overwhelming firepower made them vulnerable to unconventional attacks. Human creativity and adaptability were force multipliers that could overcome significant technological disadvantages. On the capital world of the Zephyrian Empire, High Admiral Kethmer received Zarathis' transmission in his private chambers. He read the report 3 times before accepting its implications. The Empire's military supremacy, built over millennia of conquest, had been shattered by creatures that most Zephyrians still considered primitive savages. Kethmer immediately convened an emergency session of the Imperial War Council. The massive chamber filled with the Empire's most senior military and political leaders, their crystalline faces reflecting confusion and fear. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians faced an enemy they did not understand and could not easily defeat. "We are no longer the apex predators of this galaxy," Kethme announced to the stunned assembly. "Humanity possesses weapons and tactics that make our traditional advantages irrelevant. Worse, they fight with a creativity that our rigid thinking cannot match. We must assume they are already preparing for a larger conflict." The War Council erupted in angry debates as different factions proposed various responses to the human threat. Some demanded immediate mobilization of the entire Imperial Navy for a preemptive strike on Earth. Others suggested diplomatic overtures to negotiate a peaceful resolution. A few radical voices even proposed abandoning the Empire's aggressive expansion policies to avoid further confrontation. Captain Martinez made her decision while the Zephyrians argued among themselves. The Defiance would return to Earth immediately with their intelligence data, but not before completing one final mission. The mining world below contained thousands of enslaved workers from a dozen different species, all laboring under brutal conditions to extract resources for the Empire. The liberation of Kepler 442b took only 6 hours. The orbital defense platforms had been destroyed during the fleet battle, and the surface garrisons surrendered without resistance when faced with weapons that could strike them from orbit. The freed slaves looked up at the stars with wonder as they realized their long nightmare was finally over. Among the liberated populations was a group of engineers from the Tau SETI system whose mathematical abilities rivaled those of humans. They provided crucial information about Empire, industrial capabilities, and the locations of other slave worlds that might be ready for liberation. The network of oppressed species had been waiting for someone strong enough to challenge. Their masters. Dr. Walsh interviewed representatives from each liberated species, documenting the Empire's crimes and gathering intelligence about potential allies. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had been crushed under Zephyrian rule. But many still possessed advanced knowledge and technology that could be useful in the coming war. As the Defiance prepared to depart for Earth, Captain Martinez recorded her final log entry of the mission. The human warship had accomplished far more than anyone had dared hope. They had proven that the Empire could be defeated, gathered vital intelligence about enemy capabilities, and inspired hope among countless enslaved populations. The journey home would take several weeks, but Martinez knew their arrival would change everything. Earth's leaders would finally understand the true scope of the threat they faced, but they would also know that humanity possessed the tools needed for victory. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted forever, and the age of Zephyrian dominance was coming to an end. In the depths of space, the Defiance engaged its phase shift drive and vanished from normal reality, carrying news that would reshape the future of every thinking being in the galaxy.